Well, Pitt fans, the Pitt Panthers get off the snide as Pitt stops the bleeding of their losing streak with a big statement victory. Yet another for the Pitt program. Losing streak smack dab in the middle of two statement wins. One against Duke, and then we saw the three games in a row that Pitt lost. And now another statement win, this one over a ranked Virginia Tech team. Pitt winning 83-72 and held on at the end, held on in the middle, able to contend early on. Pitt did what they had to do to defeat the Hokies. Mike Asti here, and George Michalowski joins me for this edition of Pitt Hoops Talk here on Pittsburgh Postgame on Pittsburgh Sports Live, as George makes his PSL debut here as he becomes a guest on this show to talk some Pitt Hoops. Champagnie, a slow start, ends up picking it up at the end to kind of take over and become that star for Pitt and do what he does best. Xavier Johnson out of nowhere with a 32-point showing, 11 for 17. So he comes off the bench and shoots the lights out and becomes that star for Pitt in addition with Champagnie. And Pitt gets a much-needed victory. And while the weather still has not heated up around Pittsburgh, Pitt at least heated up on the hardwood. So again, Pitt winning 83-72. George Michalowski, Mike Asti here. Feel free to chat along with us. If you do, we'll talk to you. If not, then George and I will discuss this game. So George, Pitt gets the win, which is by far the most important thing. They really had to stop the bleeding. This was obviously a game they weren't going to be favored in. It is a big statement win, much like the Duke game was, maybe even more so because Virginia Tech having a much better year than Duke has been having this year. But they just hadn't been playing well. They needed this win. They need to hang on towards the end. Virginia Tech did make it a game there, but it was an off night for the Hokies. What are your takeaways right now? A lot to discuss here, obviously. Pitt getting the win, but not really winning it in a fashion you probably would have expected if Pitt had a big win tonight. You probably would have thought Champagnie maybe goes for 25-30 if Pitt gets a win over the number 17th ranked team in the country. Not the case. He does struggle early on, but Xavier Johnson gets those 32 points for Pitt, and they get the victory.
Right, Mike, and I think you have to start right there. You have to start with two words, Xavier Johnson. Really, I think Coach Capel made a very good call today. Obviously, starting Femi Odukale and Nike Sabande over Xavier Johnson and Ithiel Horton, who had struggled. I mean, Johnson had, 5 points in the last game, visibly struggling, playing out of control. I mean, today comes off the bench. Obviously, the announcer said it. We all knew it. He was going to play starters minutes. But he wasn't in the starting lineup. That definitely fired him up. Really emotional player. But yeah, I think as X went, the team went tonight. 32 points, 7 assists, career high in points. Continues to be the leading assist man in the ACC. And then once he started going, it was great to see because it really opened up the whole floor for the rest of the team. Even Audis Tony, slow start to the game. Justin Champagnie as well. Ithiel Horton, they all struggled shooting the ball in the first half, couldn't really put up big numbers. And then as they settled into the game and as Johnson continued to play controlled, which we haven't really seen as of late from him, they started making shots. And Tony started hitting threes. Horton started hitting threes. Champagnie started bullying guys down low, even when he was getting bullied the whole game. He was getting guarded very tough. But I really think tonight, it was all about Xavier Johnson. As he went, the team went.
52 points in that second half for Pitt, and they needed all of them to get the victory. That score maybe not indicative of how it did get close at one point. For Pitt, again, winning 83-72. And I got to ask you, because, again, Champagnie did struggle, certainly in that first half, even though he does finish with a solid effort. It's hard to say a guy struggles when he ends up with a double-double, 13 boards, very, very important in this game, but only 10 points. And he's been a double-double machine that's getting closer to 20 points with his 10 boards instead of just 10. So what do you think Virginia Tech did in that first half or really throughout the game to try to neutralize him? He went on a run in that second half, and obviously it appeared that many Pitt fans probably would have thought, okay, if we need Xavier Johnson to score 30 to win this game, it's not going to happen. Champagnie has to be the best player. Virginia Tech took the strategy. They want to go at the superstar, leave somebody else open, and that somebody else beat them. But what did Virginia Tech do to slow Champagnie down? And Was that the strategy that you saw, that they went into this game thinking we're going to take Champagnie out of this, make somebody else beat us, and it turned out somebody else did beat them?
For sure. I think that's exactly what they were going for. I mean, everyone on Twitter, you can see right now, everyone who doesn't really follow Pitt basketball is like, what is going on with this team? I thought it was a Champagnie show. I thought Johnson was out of control all the time. And they just put Justin Mutz on Champagnie, and their big guys down low were guarding Champagnie so well. They were cutting him off, weren't allowing post feeds, cutting him off before the ball could even get to him, which was what other teams have failed to do, because we all know Champagnie gets the ball inside, you're done. I mean, he'll go up with his left hand in the paint, he'll spin around, fade away on the baseline. I mean, Justin on the baseline is like unstoppable this year in the ACC. And when they put Mutz on him that whole game, he really just shut him down. I mean, he was bullying Champagnie for a good amount of time. And him as well as Aluma, I mean, down low with Koulibaly and Champagnie, I mean, Virginia Tech played them defensively inside very well. But then it was time for Xavier Johnson, the second option, who Virginia Tech probably thought was not going to play as well as he did. It was time for him to step up, and him, Horton, Tony, they all did the job.
I don't think anybody thought he was going to play as well as he did. Not to say he doesn't have it in him, but 32 points, 11 for 17. So again, it wasn't just a measly 32 where he's chucking shots. It was an efficient game for him. Not again as efficient for Champagnie, but he wasn't needed and really maybe deserving of a night off for Pitt to get a victory without the world on his shoulders, because we've seen him have dominating performances to lead them to wins and even play very well and have those not be victories. Pitt snapping that 3-game losing streak with an 83-72 win over Virginia Tech. So a big statement win for Pitt. Yet again, another one of those on the schedule. Certainly helps the overall resume and overall opportunity at the postseason that Pitt looked to have assured even 2 weeks ago. And certainly there was a concern with those games in a row and the losing streak for Pitt and what was to come schedule-wise, that they weren't going to be favored and were going to be stacking losses. Nonetheless, they get the win. They do it without Champagnie dominating. George Michalowski, Mike Asti here. George, coming at you from Pittsburgh Sports Now, one of the new contributors over there at PSN, as we're talking Pitt hoops, and it is after a Pitt victory here on Pittsburgh Postgame on Pittsburgh Sports Live. So the other side of the coin of Champagnie struggling, certainly at least early in the game, and the strategy of trying to neutralize him and get him out of the game for Virginia Tech, which now the blueprint is there, that maybe that's not good enough if Pitt gets as much help around him. He's not got enough help. Alan and I had been talking about on the last few Pitt postgame shows during that losing streak that even including the Duke game where Champagnie was able to go crazy, there hasn't been enough help from the co-stars, from the other members of that big three that people were talking about. Now you see that with Xavier Johnson. So the other end of Champagnie struggling in the strategy for Virginia Tech is what Xavier Johnson did in the game that he had. And he has to be the focus of this show, of course. 32 points, 11 for 17 again. Was it just simply that he hit shots? Did you see something else in him from this game in terms of spacing, in terms of getting open? And is there a chance to expect more of this to come, which Pitt maybe will need if teams incorporate a similar strategy to what the Hokies did in this game, even though they didn't get a victory?
Well, I think you have to start to look at Johnson's craftiness and ability in the open court with the ball. I mean, as wild as he can get, we all have seen it.
Right.
Tonight was just another example of like him at his peak. And some of his crossovers, I mean, he gets into the lane. All season he's been doing it. He's been getting open layups. He makes the moves. He just hasn't been finishing at the rim. He's been getting charging fouls called on him. He's just been a little bit off the whole season. He's been getting open looks, too, from three. And, yes, he hit a lot from outside. But I think it was really the spacing that he can create. I mean, after his freshman year, I know he was getting NBA looks. I mean, scouts were saying they liked what they saw out of him, explosiveness and everything. And now I think he just played to his ability tonight. He played inside well, got to the basket, dished the ball out well, 7 assists. I mean, he's the ACC's leading assist man.
Yeah.
Which
that's
forget.
not uncharacteristic. That part's not uncharacteristic, but 5 points against Notre Dame, a loss. 7 points against North Carolina, a loss. And that was a game that Pitt maybe thought they had a chance after the Duke game. Obviously, North Carolina struggling also like Duke has been this year. So tripling up the point total for one game for Xavier Johnson. So it was kind of a little bit out of nowhere for him to give you this much production. Is there a chance to expect this again? Meaning the question would be, if Champagnie would struggle or have an off night, can this be expected from Xavier Johnson again, or is this more of an aberration? The assists have been there all year, but not these points.
I would say it could happen again. I don't know about 32. I mean, career high numbers, but I think we could see Johnson, if he plays controlled, that's definitely the key to his game. He's got to stay within his own head. He's got to stay within his own game.
Right.
Just focus. And, I think Capel putting him on the bench tonight to start off the game really, I don't know about humbled him, because it's not like Johnson's a very cocky guy. He's a good kid. He's always wanted to win. He's always been team first.
Right.
But I think that really just motivated him even more to just calm down and play within himself. And so I do think it's possible. I think if Champagnie does struggle, I think we can look to X to provide late game moments like he did against Northwestern, like he has in earlier games this year, and light up the scoring sheet like he did today.
Yeah, Xavier Johnson lit up the scoring sheet, to say the least. 32 points, 11 for 17 again, and the assists also there for Xavier Johnson. So a fantastic game for him off the bench again. That's 5 rebounds, 7 assists. So a fantastic outing, to say the very, very least. Almost. He didn't end up with a double-double, but almost close on both counts on rebounds and assists. Could have easily been a triple-double for him if he would have had a few more in those two categories. Pitt getting an 83-72 victory. Thanks to Xavier Johnson's big night. Champagnie only 10 points, 13 boards, and a couple assists. Not a bad night for most players out there, but certainly a struggling night when you're looking at a guy that's been talked about as ACC Player of the Year with how dominating he's been early on in the season. You see Tony with 14 going down the line here. Horton also off the bench, 15. So Pitt getting a lot more bench scoring. Now, does that give you the thought that maybe Jeff Capel tipped his hand for more than just this game? Certainly the conversation was Xavier Johnson needed humbled, the foul trouble, certainly inconsistent shooting, maybe try to tweak the lineup. You got to do something when you're in the midst of a losing streak, because I talked about it with Alan, and Alan's been covering Pitt for a very, very long time, as long as anybody, and he kind of was saying that obviously fans, media, even rival fans seem to all appreciate Jeff Capel, but eventually you can't continuously have seasons get puttered away and collapse at the end of these years, especially if they would lose a lot of these games in a row and would miss the tournament. So this win certainly probably avoids that and stops the bleeding a little bit. But there was pressure on Jeff Capel to turn this around and to stop things from getting out of hand. So that could have been just tweaking the lineup for this game. Or do you see this lineup being tweaked now permanently because of how well it worked? It might have been an aberration with Xavier not always expected to chuck 30 every game, and Champagnie you expect more from, and this might have just been how this game shook out. But the way things worked in this game, it provided Pitt more depth, more scoring from the bench, and you got to see the best outing from Xavier Johnson. You got to see a solid game from Tony. Is this a lineup you can see Pitt working with ongoing the rest of the year because of how it worked out in this game, or maybe just a blip against Virginia Tech?
Right, yeah. So I don't know exactly if it will be the same combination. Like, I don't know if we're going to see Nike and Odukale start again.
Right.
But at the same time, I think that works because in many ways, like you were saying, but I also really I think he can keep doing this because of how comfortable Odukale has looked as a freshman. He had 7 points today. He came in first couple points of the game, and one of his big improvements that I saw today was from the free throw line. I mean, that's been one of his biggest downfalls this year. He knocked them all down. I think he was 3 for 3 from the line, yeah. And he started shooting outside jumpers with more confidence. And, he's just a junkyard dog, kind of Brooklyn guy. Like, I think he's going to be a really special player, not only in the next few years for Pitt, but down the road. And I think him, as well as, we've seen Nike in other games step out and hit a few threes, look confident with the ball in his hands. And then Terrell Brown gave some good minutes off the bench today as well.
Right.
So I do think that these different starting lineups, these different bench combinations could definitely be seen in the near future by Capel, not only in the next game against Virginia, but down the road.
George Michalowski from Pittsburgh Sports Now. Mike Asti here on the Pitt Hoops edition of Pittsburgh Postgame on Pittsburgh Sports Live. Pitt snaps their three-game losing streak, 83-72 over Virginia Tech. And you alluded to it right there, so we'll get into the preview because, again, this game was the Xavier Johnson show. It was not the Champagnie show, but somebody else stepped up when Pitt needed them to based on how the game shook out and the strategy from the opponent. So we'll see if that continues. We'll see if we get more of that from X and if Pitt's depth continues based on this new lineup and if we see more of that to come here. But it'll be a major question mark in Pitt's next game because Pitt's next game is against Virginia, a team that oddly enough Virginia Tech beat early on in the season. And you saw what Pitt did to the Hokies here tonight. So looking at that game, and it's still an important game, a win here certainly could kind of rebound for that Wake Forest loss by 1 point, for North Carolina by 10, and then even the loss to Notre Dame, those struggling teams with brand names, and then the loss to Wake Forest, who's been struggling. Those games could maybe get canceled out if you stack these quality wins. What do you expect from that game against Virginia? That game on Saturday against number 14 Virginia, obviously a recent national champion, not as elite as that year, but still a very, very talented team, a team that has been vulnerable to an upset this year, as I mentioned, against Virginia Tech. Granted, Virginia Tech has been a quality team this year, and maybe some could call this loss to Pitt an upset. But what does Pitt need to do to beat Virginia? Do they need to be much better than this game? Because that probably is the reality. And how do you expect that game against Virginia to play out for Pitt on Saturday?
Right. So Virginia, while they're not as good as they were in their national championship run, or at least they look like that so far, they're 11-3. They're 7-0 at home, 7-1 in the ACC. They're actually playing right now. They're up against NC State early on. But, I mean, they're going to give Pitt a run for sure. Pitt should not. I mean, I think they learned after the Duke game that no win in the ACC midseason is worth celebrating very much because the road ahead is not going to get any easier. So
yeah, Pitt got some humble pie there. They got some humble pie after that big win. They were celebrating. Duke's a little down than normal, and then you're stacking losses after that. And you could maybe, and I talked about this with Alan, okay, maybe you give a mulligan for Wake Forest just being hot shooting and you lose by 1. But North Carolina, that's a team that's not that great this year despite talent. Okay, because of the talent, maybe you give them that. The Notre Dame loss was really, really, really bad, and all the headlines out there were embarrassing and different additives that would fit that game. So it was really important for Pitt to start this new streak, clean slate, and a big win over Virginia Tech. But they now need to get back to work for Virginia. Yeah, for sure.
Right, and Virginia's led. I mean, they've got some veterans. Like, what else do you expect from a Virginia team? Sam Hauser, I mean, redshirt senior, transfer from Marquette, very good shooter, 14.6 points a game this year. Jay Huff, 7'1". I mean, he's just a problem on the inside. He will definitely give Pitt problems with Coulibaly. Obviously, no Hughley anymore, but with Coulibaly and Champagnie kind of running as our 4 and 5 in the past few games. So I think the inside battle will be tough for Pitt against Virginia. But I also think two big keys to that game and for the rest of the season for Pitt will be Ithiel Horton and Audice Toney, because I really liked what I saw from them tonight.
Right.
I mean, I was getting ready for all the tweets after the game. If we had lost, saying what is up with Toney? I mean, Horton can't shoot. Toney hasn't scored more than 7-8 points in the last few weeks. But both of them really stepped it up towards the end of the game in the second half.
They did, and the same thing would have been said about Xavier Johnson if he didn't have a big game. And I don't think anyone would have expected 32 points or would even required 32 points. But again, 5 points against Notre Dame as Pitt got embarrassed, 7 points the game prior in a loss to a team that's been struggling this year. So it can't just be Champagnie every game. And I think the way Pitt won this game is a big deal because they won without Champagnie having to dominate. It's one thing if Champagnie dominates, and we've seen a 30-point triple-double. We've seen a 20-20 game, a Shaq-like performance earlier in the year. Okay, when you have a player doing that, you're usually going to win, or you should, and if you don't, that's a problem with depth. But to win when that's not happening is a big deal. And to win, like we talked about earlier in the show, when a team strategizes and clearly schemes just to take out one man and you still can win because somebody else steps up, which has not been happening recently, that's a big deal. No guarantees 32 points are happening again. No guarantees 22 are happening again. But I think Xavier, even if he gets closer to 15 points a game the rest of this season, if the strategy is going to be like this to take out Champagnie, that'll certainly help Pitt. But of course, you need more than just him and Tony. Tony and Horton are definitely players that need to be involved as well. Now, George, I do want to ask you this because Pitt's season has been a roller coaster ride a little bit. There's been big wins. There's a big statement win tonight against Virginia Tech. There's even a big statement win against Duke on that resume, but there's been some mediocre to maybe even bad losses, again, going to that Wake Forest game. Now, that game against Virginia will be the toughest game Pitt has the rest of the season, but it's not like it's easy sledding the rest of the way here. Louisville, Georgia Tech, NC State, Clemson, NC State again, Wake Forest, and Clemson. None of those teams are currently ranked, but Pitt has already lost to Wake Forest once, granted by only 1 point. We've seen Louisville play Pitt well. Granted, that game is where the Cardinals are going to definitely be looking to get revenge after losing to Pitt earlier in the season. NC State can be a team that's given problems to some other teams in the ACC, even though they're not having that great of a year. How do you see the rest of this schedule shaking out for Pitt? And for you, what does Pitt need to do the rest of this season to get in the tournament? Are they currently an NCAA tournament team for you? Like almost everyone would have guaranteed to be the case after the Duke win. Do they still need to play themselves into it because maybe they played themselves out of it with that losing streak? Or if they hold water and give some respectable finish to the season, is that good enough? These now are going to be all conference games, a lot of non-ranked teams, but still teams that could give Pitt problems, and you just never know with this Pitt team.
Right, and the schedule does not get any easier, like you said. Right now, I do not think Pitt's a tournament team. I think we will have to, or not we, I think Pitt will have to play themselves into the tournament. Like you said, Virginia, Louisville, Clemson, I mean, they've all been ranked this season.
Yeah.
Just had a couple tough losses, but I mean, Clemson's 11-5. Georgia Tech, team that reminds me a lot of Pitt. I think that could be a tough game that not a lot of people will look into as a loss for Pitt. And in the usual Pitt fan outlook, I think people are definitely looking at these games right now, just marking down wins against Georgia Tech, NC State, and Clemson and Wake Forest with the loss to UVA and Louisville. But
you never know. You never know.
all of these teams will give Pitt a fight. And obviously Wake Forest is just scary. I mean, Ismail Massoud, 8 of 10 from 3 last game against Pitt. That just gives every Pitt fan nightmares and ruins all of our tournament hopes. But I do think they can win some of those big games. I mean, the Louisville game will be close. Virginia is going to be interesting. I think these next 2 games will really tell us if Pitt's a tournament team. If Pitt can stay very close to them, even if they end up in losses. I mean, 2 losses to Virginia or 2 losses to Louisville and a loss to Virginia on your resume isn't the end of the world. We talked to Mike Asti earlier on in the season of Fox Sports, and he told us, he was saying, Pitt's just got to beat the teams that are like Pitt. So Georgia Tech, I mean, Clemson's pretty close. NC State's a little bit lower. Wake's a little bit lower in the conference. But these teams are all kind of hovering around like decent ACC teams. And I think if Pitt wins those games, Georgia Tech, NC State, Wake, maybe gets 1 or 2 wins out of the Clemson games, and then maybe wins 1 out of the 2 against UVA and Louisville, I think they will have a good shot at the tournament.
Yeah, and Louisville, one of the losses for Pitt so far in the year, losing to Louisville by 10 points. Of course, you know that 3-game losing streak. So you take out those, and Pitt in the midst of a fantastic season. Right. Obviously, another one of those losses is to Wake Forest, that one by only 1 point. And both of those teams are on the schedule here coming up. These are not ranked ACC teams. ACC, a little bit of a down year in comparison to normally the production of the conference overall, without Duke, North Carolina, and Syracuse and some of those teams, normally top 10, top 15 teams, down and not ranked right now. So Joe Lunardi and company are also not going to hold any favor to Pitt, because they're going to say those teams you lost to or now are going to lose to aren't having great of years as they normally would. So Pitt doesn't have that benefit of these elite competition coming up, but still not any guaranteed wins. Certainly a tough road coming up, and a win over Virginia could really help things moving forward and maybe really punch that ticket for Pitt. Because I think after that Duke game, everyone probably thought Pitt's headed to the tournament at the very least. Certainly 3 games after that, when you're looking at 3 consecutive losses, it's a different story, especially when those games are to non-ranked teams as well. But a win over Virginia Tech changes that story a little bit as well. Maybe now it's another statement win for Pitt. So you never know. The roller coaster ride for Pitt certainly continues, and certainly the implications will continue even going towards the ACC tournament as well. Any final words on anything you saw from this game or even coming up here for Pitt? Obviously, 4 p.m. Saturday, that game against Virginia is going to be a big deal. I don't think anyone's expecting Pitt to win that game. Maybe some would expect the victory now after what they did to Virginia Tech. But obviously, that's a game that really could change your year, could really punch that ticket to you to March Madness. But a win would certainly make people expect more wins later on in the year, so that could still be ruined. And that's kind of what Pitt's done early on this season as well, a big win and then follows it up with a poor loss. So this resume, if you kind of get rid of that first week of the season and that bizarre loss to St. Francis that no one understands based on what their season has been since, and you can find that coverage over there throughout our Now network at Nittany Sports Now. It's very confusing if you look at that loss now for Pitt. But just Louisville, Duke, Wake Forest, North Carolina, and Notre Dame, those aren't really that bad of losses, even though 3 in a row makes it look bad. So if Pitt can finish strong, they certainly can salvage things for Capel, and certainly make a tournament run, but it all will remain to be seen.
Right. One final point for me. I really liked what I saw from Pitt tonight, getting to the free throw line, because earlier in the season, I mean, coming into this game, Pitt was ranked last in the ACC, dead last in free throw percentage. Tonight, 22 of 25 from the line. I mean, we saw everyone. We saw Koulibaly, I think, made a few. Odekale, 3 for 3. I mean, Champagnie was 4 for 4, I believe. So we really got the job done at the line. And sometimes when you're cold on offense, like when Champagnie was cold in the beginning, he got the ball inside in the beginning of the second half, just chucked up a wild shot, got to the line, drained 2 free throws, kind of got rolling. So I think that can really be a key to them, especially if, like you said earlier, if Johnson doesn't give us 32 every time down the road, if Champagnie can't explode for 20 and 20. So I think getting to the line and getting physical with the other team could really be a strength of Pitt down low, especially with these hard-nosed wings that we have in Tony and Champagnie.
And Virginia, going to be a hungry team facing the Panthers as well, because Virginia coming off a loss right now to Virginia Tech, a team that Pitt just beat. Virginia playing a tough game right now against a team that Pitt will see later on in the year in NC State. So it'll be a test for Pitt, win, lose, or draw. That's going to be a test for Pitt to see what they do. I know a lot of people are going to be looking at that game to really gauge the rest of the year. By far, the best team Pitt will face the rest of this regular season. George Michalowski from Pittsburgh Sports Now. George, definitely appreciate the time. Absolutely. You made your PSL debut on a Pitt victory. So that wasn't the case the last few games. So you can find also all our post-game coverage there for Pittsburgh Sports Now and crew over there at pittsburghsportsnow.com. Alan Saunders covering the game for us. So we got all the post-game coverage over there, the game story, etc. over there at PSN. And also we'll have some of those post-game recap videos, post-game reaction videos here on Pittsburgh Sports Live as well. Click on this subscribe button there, bottom of the video, smash that button, free to do so. Will help us get all of our content to you. You'll get a notification when any of our shows go live or anything is released here throughout the channel. And of course, the channel and the family of networks can be found on social at PGH Sports Now and at PGH Sports Live on Twitter. So for George Michalowski, for all of us throughout the Pittsburgh Sports Now family of networks and also Pittsburgh Sports Live, I'm your host, as always, Mike Asti. Pitt gets off the snide. Pitt stops the bleeding. Pitt heats up the hardwood, even though the weather still has not heated itself up here around Pittsburgh. Pitt winning 83-72 with another statement win. And now it'll remain to be seen if Pitt can follow up that statement win, unlike last time, with more wins and more quality play and showing that depth and being able to win when Champagnie does not dominate. It happened in this game. Will it happen again the rest of the season? A major question mark, but Pitt now has their destiny in front of them, and Pitt certainly is in a much better spot after a big win over Virginia Tech. All right. Thanks.